It is a good afternoon in Harare, Zimbabwe from ZTN Studios. Welcome to Access to Justice. Now, our topic today, we will be discussing focus on the accessibility to justice by vulnerable groups. Now, this broadcast is brought to you by ZTN, Zimbabwe's TV network, as well as our partners, Transparency International Zimbabwe. My name is Candice, and now we know that corruption negatively impacts the enjoyment of all human rights, civil, political, economic, social and cultural, as well as the right to development, which underscores the indivisible and interdependent nature of human rights. It also undermines the fairness of institution processes, distorting policies and priorities. As a result of that, corruption damages the legitimacy of regimes, leading to a loss of public support and trust for state and government institutions. Disadvantaged groups and vulnerable persons suffer disproportionately from corruption. They are often more reliant on public services and public goods and have limited or no means to look for alternative private services. This means that disadvantaged sectors of the society particularly have fewer opportunities to participate meaningfully in the design and implementation of public policies and programs, and often lack the resources or knowledge to seek redress or remedies. Now, joining us today on Access to Justice is in the studio Alois Nyamazana. Alois is, of course, with Transparency International as the Monitoring, Evaluations and Learning Officer for Transparency International Zimbabwe. Thank you for joining us, Alois.
Thank you, Candy. Good afternoon, viewers.
All right. Now, later on, we will be joined throughout the conversation over the telephone by Commissioner Charity Matumbi, who is the Acting Secretary of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, Valerie Zhuya, who is the Advocacy, Research and Strategic Litigation Coordinator from Legal Resources Foundation, and of course Justice Uladi, who is the Chief Law Officer at the National Prosecuting Authority. Now, Alois, to get the show rolling, of course, what is the state of corruption in Zimbabwe?
Thank you, Candy. In terms of the state of corruption in Zimbabwe, as a nation, we still have a very long way to go. Recently, Transparency International, the Global Transparency International, released the Global Corruption Perception Index that raised performance of countries in terms of how they are doing on corruption. We rated 24%, that is 24 out of 100. On a scale of 100, we scored 24. I always say if it's an O-level student, it's ungraded. So in terms of corruption, I think we haven't done quite well.
All right. Now, what are maybe some of the main forms through which corruption thrives in Zimbabwe in particular?
Zimbabwe, corruption is a very complicated social phenomena. It happens in quite a number of dimensions. But in Zimbabwe, we have mostly grand political corruption that involves those politically powerful people. We also have bribery, that is the pet level corruption where people exchange money in order to get some services. We also have what you call clientelism, whereby people that are connected, that know each other, also connive in order to get some favors. We also have what you call petty level corruption that happens on a day-to-day basis, where people just exchange some goods and services in return for some favors.
Okay. All right. Now, you've touched on bribery. Interestingly enough, findings from the 2019 Afrobarometer revealed that the overall bribery rate as of 2019 is 25%, having increased by 3% since 2012. Now, why do you think bribery is so endemic in Zimbabwe?
Bribery is so endemic in Zimbabwe because of quite a number of factors. One is issues around poor access to services, social services. For example, water. Some people have to bribe to get water. Some people have to bribe to get services that are supposed to be gotten for free. For example, if you go to birth certificates, the passports, they are not coming out easily. So people have also to bribe to get those the passports. Go to VID, it's not easy to get a license without bribing in Zimbabwe. It's actually public knowledge that when you're going to VID, you have to bribe. Okay. So I think issues around poor access to services, poor access to information, and poor social service provision are some of the issues that catapult corruption in Zimbabwe.
Okay. Now, what role do we have CSOs playing in fighting corruption in Zimbabwe? And, what are some of the challenges that they would probably be experiencing in trying to fight this scourge?
CSOs have a very big role to play in the fight against corruption. Firstly, the CSOs, they represent the people. So the most important way that they do is first to empower the citizens to resist, report and reject corruption. So really it's through providing information, educating the citizens on how they can detect and report corruption. Secondly, CSOs can also work with government in terms of formulating policies, guiding the government in terms of the best practices on how we can fight corruption as a nation. The other thing that the CSOs can do is also to help the vulnerable people to access justice in terms of legal advice, legal information on how they can report and fight corruption. So CSOs really have a very big role to play. The other important role that CSOs can play is that watchdog role in terms of monitoring and watching how the policymakers, the government is also doing its work and also providing the necessary checks and balances.
All right. Now, as you and I will continue, of course, our discussion, but we do have our first guest on the line, who is Commissioner Charity Matumbi, who is the Acting Secretary of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. Alois, please note that if you do want to ask her any questions or have any additions, just note them down, and then when she's done, we can jump in and ask her those questions. Charity, thank you for joining us.
Hello, how are you, Candice?
I'm well, thanks. Now, let's start our discussion with you. Now, there is a perception that a network of corruption exists within the entire justice system, and this prejudices vulnerable sectors of communities. How is ZAC addressing this perception?
Okay, thank you very much. I think I would agree with the perception, because this is the perception of the public and the generality of Zimbabwe. And as ZAC, we have taken very positive steps towards this. I think if you have watched the media, we have engaged a lot of stakeholders through MOUs, that is Memoranda of Understanding, so that we can actually get an insight into what the problem is. If you see, we have engaged departments in the justice system, so that we actually enhance cooperation and communication as to what measures they are taking against corruption, and also what actually has been put in place, what steps have been put in place. Are there any integrity committees? Are there desks to report corruption? And if you find also, we've also taken a step to have MOUs with the civil society organizations like our TIZ, and we have actually been getting positive results from this.
All right. Now, Charity, the 2020 budget statement made reference to the need for fighting corruption through a national anti-corruption strategy. Is ZAC actioning this call, and to what extent will it help with fighting corruption in Zimbabwe?
Okay, Candice, thank you so much. I think we have actually had a very early call to this action for a national anti-corruption strategy. If you are aware, the strategy is actually in action right now, and as ZAC, we partnered with a lot of stakeholders, including the TIZ, in coming up with this national anti-corruption strategy. What is important to know is that this is a public document, and we wanted to encompass public participation in it, and also a multi-stakeholder approach towards this. So there were 10 provinces that were engaged. There was wide consultation, and also I think recently we had validation workshops after those consultative meetings that we had to come up with this document. The National Anti-Corruption Strategy has actually been drafted, and it was awaiting the launch. This was just before we got into the pandemic that we are in with coronavirus. But I'm glad to say that the document has been put together. And as ZAC, we have spearheaded this with a lot of stakeholders and ensured that it gets to the grassroots. We wanted to encompass everybody's view on how we can curb corruption from the family, from the community, from institutions, private sector, CSOs, and everybody. So this is where we are. We have actually come up with this strategy as ZAC and other stakeholders.
Now, are you at liberty to probably tell us a few of the items that are addressed in, maybe the suggestions that are made in this document?
Of course, yes. I'll just give pointers, as this is not a public document as yet, but because it's a multi-stakeholder document, we can share some of this. Actually, the vision of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy is to make Zimbabwe a corrupt-free country where honesty and integrity have become a culture for Zimbabweans. And you will find that we have also looked at what is the cause of corruption from the different stakeholders. We have actually gathered information and data to find out what is it that is causing corruption in Zimbabwe and why has it become so endemic. So you will find from the stakeholders that we engaged, some of the issues are the ones that Alice has been talking about. You know, there is no access to information in Zimbabwe. There is no access to social services. So there is, in the end, corruption. You have to pay to get the very necessary and the very basic services in Zimbabwe. And you also find that somebody that is in the rural areas, they do not know, they do not have access to information. They actually think it's a privilege, and yet it's a social right that they can access, but because they do not have information that is close by. So this is what causes corruption, petty corruption to grand corruption. And you also find that public institutions, there is a lot of abuse of power in public institutions, which has become endemic. And this national anti-corruption strategy now will come into curb this. You'd see a lot of power being centralized into one person. Because of this, you have to get authority from a certain public official, and politically exposed persons also have been a contribution to the endemic corruption in Zimbabwe. You also find that it has cost us, the ease of doing business has been very high because of corruption. So these are some of the pointers and indicators that I can highlight, which we have in the National Anti-Corruption Strategy.
All right. Now, you do mention public institutions being, caught up in issues to do with corruption. The 2018 Auditor General's report for state enterprises and parastatals revealed that corruption in such states institutions as the Grain Marketing Board, the Zimbabwe Electricity Transmission and Distribution Company, ZETDC, the Zimbabwe Power Company, ZPC, both of these being subsidiaries of ZESA Holdings, just to mention a few. Now, what is ZAC doing in response to this report, and can these findings actually be used to effect arrests?
Okay, thank you very much. I think, yes, it has been very much publicized, but the commission, the new commission that is here, has actually taken a new step. If you look at it previously, Auditor General's reports have always been there. Not much was being done, but with the inception of the new commission, you'll find that we have taken action against this Auditor General's report. Firstly, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Auditor General, and as you will know, that an Auditor General's report is mainly to highlight or bring out to the public the controls, lack of controls, and also maybe the malfeasance in public entities. But this has been a good source for ZAC to start investigations. I will give you examples. Some of them are in the public domains. We are investigating. There have been arrests for the National Social Security. I think the former Minister of the Public Service and Social Welfare was arrested. This was emanating from a report of the Auditor General. And also for the Zimbabwe National Roads Authority, there's been a number of arrests that have been made by ZAC. These have been emanating from these Auditor General's reports. And also for GMB, ZAC has actually embarked on a compliance audit to check the internal control and systems of that entity. This has been emanating from the Auditor General's report. And for investigations, of course, we cannot divulge if the arrests have not been made, but there are a number of initiatives and actions that ZAC is embarking on for all these reports. As you understand, our capacity is also limited, hence the speed or maybe the expectation of the public may not be met as they want it to be.
All right, Charity, before we let you off the line, now 60% of respondents to the Afrobarometer indicated that corruption has increased in Zimbabwe. Is this true?
I would agree with that perception, because you will find that everywhere we go, including the consultative meetings that we had for the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, they point to that corruption continues to increase in Zimbabwe. And as the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, this is why we have continued and amplified our efforts to actually train and get maximum cooperation from our stakeholders, to engage also civil society, so that we can have a multi-pronged approach towards corruption. Because you can tell from the number of reports that we get, there is increased corruption, and it continues day by day. But our efforts also need to be amplified, and we are hoping that because of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which has an implementation matrix that is so simplified and so clear, we are going to be able to improve this perception actually. And also, what is making us get a bit of satisfaction, it's not a victory, but you'll find in terms of the corruption perception index, we increased our index by 2 points. That is not to say that there's no corruption, but it is an indicator that there are certain steps and initiatives being taken to curb corruption. So I'm actually happy to state that I think where ZAC is today is not where it was 10 years ago, and I think in a few years to come, it will actually be better.
All right, Charity, thank you so much for joining us. We will let you go now and continue with the discussion in studio.
Thank you.
All right. Good day. All right, Alois, so, she did mention that while crafting this national anti-corruption strategy, they did have consultations with different groups, and she did actually say that she spoke to Transparency International Zimbabwe, or rather, ZAC spoke to Transparency International Zimbabwe. Would you be at liberty to maybe tell us some of the suggestions that you gave them?
Thank you so much, Candice. We have been working very closely with the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, especially in terms of developing the national anti-corruption strategy. But what we initially started as TI, we did more like a model draft national anti-corruption strategy without much of the involvement of ZAC. But we are very happy that after we produced a model and through engagement and consultations, then ZAC took it up at the national level, and then they are now working on the development of the national anti-corruption strategy. And we are very happy that, as TI said, we are also part of the thematic working group that is developing the national anti-corruption strategy. So I would say, in terms of what is in the national the suggested issues that are coming out from the national anti-corruption strategy, they will also mirror what we are thinking as Transparency International Zimbabwe. So I would say, because we've looked at issues around corruption within the justice sector, corruption within the business sector, corruption within natural resource governance, corruption even issues around citizen empowerment, as some of the thematic issues that we are focusing. And that's what we suggested as Transparency International Zimbabwe. And we are very glad that ZAC took all those issues to be part of the national anti-corruption strategy.
Okay, so you then you have had these talks with them. They have taken this up. What are we hoping happens through this document? What is the ideal picture? Let's give it maybe a two-year timeline, because 5 years might be long.
I'll also repeat that we are very happy that we are working with ZAC. We actually have a memorandum of understanding with ZAC. And what we are expecting as Transparency International Zimbabwe is not to have a document that will gather dust in the shelves. What you want is to ensure that whatever is going to come out of the national anti-corruption strategy, and I'm very happy that the commissioner mentioned a matrix, implementation matrix. So what we are going to do is ensure that everything that's planned is implemented. And in the next 2 years, we want to expect to see some changes. And obviously, we are going to be measuring ourselves using various indices. For example, the Global Corruption Perception Index, the Afrobarometer, and all other those indices. So once we start implementing the national anti-corruption strategy, we also want to expect to see a change in the level of corruption within the country. So we're going to be jointly monitoring as a watchdog, though work with ZAC, but we also play our watchdog role in terms of advocating to ensure that everything that is in the national anti-corruption strategy is implemented as planned.
All right. Now, joining in our conversation is Justice Uladi, who is the Chief Law Officer at the National Prosecuting Authority. He's joining us over the telephone. Justin, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So, Justice, what role has the National Prosecuting Authority been playing in fighting corruption, and what is your success rate in terms of actual prosecutions?
Thank you. The role of the National Prosecuting Authority, in fact, its mandate is given by the Constitution, is to institute and conduct criminal prosecutions on behalf of the state. And the role we have been playing is that we have been prosecuting all cases brought to us by the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and the ZRP. You might be aware that there are high-profile corruption cases pending before the courts those we are assisted with, and we are fully aware of the expectations of the members of the public on how we should handle those matters. With regards to the success rate, we have done fairly well, but our challenge has been that there have been applications whereby accused persons have taken their cases to the High Court, challenging their prosecution in the lower courts. So in the past, we were facing challenges when that was done, when accused persons took their matters to the High Court. We are glad to say that there has been a specialized court has been set up in the High Court to deal with all corruption cases, and it has successfully dealt with some of the cases which had been referred to it, and those cases have been referred back to the Magistrates Court for prosecution, and we look forward to prosecuting those cases as soon as the lockdown is over.
All right. Now let's take a look at maybe our legislature. From that point of view, do you think that Zimbabwe's anti-corruption laws are effective?
Definitely, yes. Our anti-corruption laws are very, very tight. And let me just bring up the issue of unexplained wealth. You might be aware that recently there was an amendment to the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act to include the issue of unexplained wealth. And if you were following newspaper articles, there are cases which we have taken to the High Court. We have made applications for the forfeiture of properties of certain accused persons who are appearing in court. So I think it's a question of enforcing the present laws as they are. There are no gaps in the laws, and I think we are okay with the laws which are currently there.
All right. I'm just going to ask Alois quickly, Justin, while you're still on the phone. Do you agree with what he's just said?
Well, I partially agree, but I think I would just add on, in terms of laws as a country, I think, for example, in our constitution, we have one of the best constitutions in the world, because our constitution is very clear on issues around corruption. It speaks about the corruption agencies and all those things that we can do to ensure access to information. So our constitution, in terms of fighting corruption, is watertight, even the laws we do have. But the challenge normally is about implementation. Mm-hmm. But of course, just like in other country, you cannot, there are also some gaps that we are also advocating for as Transparency International Zimbabwe. I will talk about the whistleblower protection policy. Mm-hmm. Right now in Zimbabwe, we don't have a clear policy on how whistleblowers should be protected. For example, if a person witnesses or is a victim of corruption, if that person wants to report, sometimes they might have to appear in person, then thereby also exposing them to further victimization. So I think in terms of the whistleblower protection policy, it's a gap that we think still exists as Transparency International Zimbabwe. We also feel that our issues around beneficial ownership. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Auditor General report that you mentioned earlier on, there are issues that came out, but right now, if you look at it, even the implementation of the recommendations of the AG is very slow. Why? Because sometimes those companies that are implicated in the report might also be politically exposed. Okay. So what we are looking for as Transparency International is to have what you call beneficial ownership transparency. Who are the owners of the companies? And how are they getting the tenders? So those things, I think, those are some of the few gaps that need to be covered.
Okay, Justin, back to you. He has mentioned a few loopholes that can be taken advantage of. How best can they be plugged?
Yeah, with regards to the issue of whistleblower protection, I agree with the presenter. Suffice to add that the Minister of Justice is seized with that matter, and there will be an enactment of a law to protect whistleblowers. I think that will come in handy and it will assist us in prosecuting our cases in courts of law.
All right. Now, Justin, earlier on we asked Commissioner Charity from the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission if they have been addressing the perception that corruption within the entire justice system prejudices vulnerable sectors of our community. Now, do you think that there is actual grounds for this particular perception?
Sorry, if you may come again, there's a perception that?
There's a perception that corruption within the entire justice system is prejudicing the vulnerable sectors of community. Do you agree with this perception?
Yes, I agree. Just a point of correction, it's not Commissioner Charity, I think.
Sorry?
You are referring to Charity Matumbi?
Yes.
Yes, okay. In fact, corruption has serious implications for the efficient administration of justice. And you may find that victims of crime may have to pay bribes for their cases to move forward. We have heard those complaints. Also, accused persons may bribe court officials, be they prosecutors or magistrates, so that they may be set free. In my view, that is hinders the rule of law in any country, and Zimbabwe is no exception. But as an institution, the National Prosecuting Authority has safeguards to deal with those issues. We believe that victims of crime, it might be a victim of rape, of domestic violence, they are our clients, they are our stakeholders, and they need our protection. So if ever that is brought to our attention that certain of our prosecutors are engaged in corrupt practices, we take stern measures against such prosecutors. We have our internal mechanisms to deal with such prosecutors, or bad apples, so to put it. We have our regulations of 2015, whereby we can charge any prosecutor accused of corruption with an act of misconduct resulting in the dismissal of such prosecutor. Further, we refer such prosecutors to the police so that they are dealt with in terms of the criminal justice system.
Okay, now how would ordinary me, who has become the victim of a crime and has to deal with all this hullabaloo, bring it to your attention that this is what's going on?
Thank you. We have an inspectorate unit in our institution. It's housed at head office. Our head office is at Corner House, that is Corner Samora Machel Avenue and Leopold Takawira. When you come there, you report to the Chief Public Prosecutor in charge of the inspectorate unit, or you can write to the Prosecutor General raising your complaints, or you can phone on our phone numbers, which I can provide you with right away.
Mm-hmm.
Our general lines are 780-124 up to, and 780-823 780-933, just to mention a few.
Okay.
You can use those numbers, or you can phone directly to me as the Acting National Director of Public Prosecutions on my direct number, which is 773246. I'll repeat, 773246. we have a zero tolerance to corruption, and we regard victims of crime as our clients who need our protection.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Justin, for giving us that information and, of course, those useful numbers for the public to make use of. Now, before I let you go, the NASA and Auditor General's reports have alleged that state institutions have been prejudiced of millions of dollars through corruption over the years. Now, is the NPA making use of these reports to prosecute?
As you may be aware, some of the cases you make reference to are already sub judice, and I wouldn't want to divulge what evidence we are using to prosecute such cases. Suffice to say that when a report is made to the police, all those documents is made to the either to the police or to ZAC. All those documents are surrendered to those agencies, and those documents will form what part of what we call the docket, which is then submitted to us. So when it comes to the actual prosecution, it's for us now to look at what is relevant to produce before the court. So if those documents are relevant to the successful prosecution of our case, we will utilize them.
All right, Justin, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion this afternoon, and we do hope that we will be hearing more from you as we continue to fight corruption.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now Alois, he has said that these reports, if a case is opened, they are all bundled and form part of the docket. But in actual fact, do such reports help in any way in the fight against corruption?
I think the main challenge that we have as a nation in the fight against corruption, maybe I'll speak firstly about the issues around public confidence, perception around the justice system. One major challenge is that the public has lost confidence with the justice system because of what has been happening within the system. For example, it takes long for people to be sentenced and convicted for crimes. And let's look at the case of former Minister Mfumira. I think some people now, they're almost forgetting about that case. And people might end up feeling like it will just go under the carpet without something being done. So I think the rate of prosecution is very low. The pace of prosecution is very low, and that then undermines public confidence. I'm happy that the public prosecutor, the national director, was saying quite a number of things. But you know what? People at grassroots level, they are looking at action. We want the results. People have been arrested. So what is happening to those cases? And I think I'm challenging the National Prosecuting Authority to speed up this pace of prosecutions and sentencing of those people that are implicated in corruption.
All right, Alice, let's take a quick break and then come back with that discussion. Now, you are watching Access to Justice. Today, our focus is the accessibility to justice for vulnerable groups. This broadcast is brought to you, of course, by Zimpapers TV Network and our partners, Transparency International Zimbabwe. Please do join us after this quick breather. Welcome back. You are watching Access to Justice. Today, our topic is the accessibility to justice by vulnerable groups. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpapers TV network and, of course, our partners, Transparency International Zimbabwe. Now, if you're just joining us, you have missed out on quite a bit of a discussion already, but we will be picking it up. Alois, analysts have said that the corruption undermines the fairness of institutions and can create conflict. Does this ring true to the Zimbabwean context? And to what extent is that impact on vulnerable communities?
Thank you so much. That relates very well with our country. If you look at one of the challenges that we have is about weak institutions, and possibly it's because of the issues around our also access to justice and corruption issues. Because as long as we still have what others call the catch and relief, the catch and release issue, then obviously people might do what they want without fearing to be arrested. So that then undermines even the strength of our public institutions. So, but if people are aware that if I engage in corrupt practices, I can be arrested, I can be sentenced and convicted, then that will then deter those that are also thinking of engaging to corruption. So corruption is actually causing our institution to be very weak. Now, on the implications on the vulnerable people, I think the most important challenge that the vulnerable people want, like what I said earlier, they have lost the confidence in public institutions, such that even the people, when they are facing some challenges, they resort to suffer in silence without having to report. But under normal circumstances, the justice system should protect the vulnerable people, should enforce the rule of law in any nation. But now, circumstances, people have lost confidence in the justice system. So that's a challenge. I know Legal Resources Foundation and the Center for Applied Legal conducted some researches recently where people actually say they no longer have confidence in public institutions. And some of the issues that then end up happening is that, for example, you have seen some people losing their properties due to corrupt practices, mostly women.
Yes.
Issues around sharing of property. Women, when they are entitled to some properties, they end up losing those properties because maybe some other people or the relatives are conniving with the police or other people within the justice sector. So maybe, for example, a husband dies and the woman is entitled to a house. Possibly they end up losing those properties because of corruption. So corruption has far-reaching implications, especially to the vulnerable people.
All right, wonderful. Now we are joined by Valerie Zhiwuya, who is the Advocacy Research and Strategic Litigation Coordinator for Legal Resources Foundation. She is on the line. Valerie, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Candice. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Now, Valerie, how exactly is corruption affecting vulnerable groups' access to justice?
All right, thanks, Candice. Corruption affects all levels, including even the community levels that we talk to, the communities that we work in. And there are various circumstances and scenarios, some related to this particular lockdown period and some that cut across. So perhaps I'll just start by giving examples of issues that have come through to the LRIF and other organizations at this particular juncture. It's issues to do with food distribution. And this is not just at the urban areas, but also even in the rural communities, where we have community representatives playing a watchdog role. So allocation of food resources, allocation of grain, complaints have come through as regards the standard that is used or the assessment factors that are being considered for people to be eligible for these bailouts. But also we look even at your primary education, your basic education assistance module, which is commonly referred to as BEAM. Who is eligible for that BEAM support? Even corruption starts at those levels within the particular community that is the committee that is responsible for selecting students for BEAM. So it's coming through, right, even from the grassroots level, right, up to the higher levels. But as an organization, our focus is mainly on the grassroots community.
All right. Now, when we then speak of the grassroots communities now with the lockdown, you've mentioned actually a very interesting part. Lockdown has seen the rise of a lot of issues such as gender-based violence, and a lot of these people don't have access to a lawyer, for example, to help them out and give them that legal advice on what action to take. How do you step in?
Thank you, Candice. So what we have done as an organization, but of course in partnership with other organizations, is we operate a toll-free line or a call center.
because we recognize that once people are in one particular environment 24 hours a day, when people are used to spending some time apart, there's other issues that causes issues to do with gender-based violence. So as the LRF, we're operating a toll-free line where people call through and the assistance is given. And also maybe just to highlight that the courts are currently open for urgent matters and matters that pertain to GBV. So if it's application for a protection order or any remedy that is needed by the litigant in those cases, then the courts are able to hear those cases. And we have lawyers on standby to assist in all GBV issues. And what we've also noticed, even in terms of patterns and trends, is that some of these GBV issues that are rising during this lockdown are not confined to the lockdown itself. But these have been issues that have been there even prior to the lockdown. But what the lockdown has done is it has exacerbated this, and it's now causing a festering of gender-based violence within the home.
All right, Valerie, now maybe just for public's interest, would you be able to give us that toll-free number?
All right. The Legal Resources Foundation toll-free number is 0808-0402.
0808-0402.
02, yes.
Okay, and I'm hoping that those who need the number have actually taken note of it. Now, continue, of course, with our discussion, Valerie. Now, do you think that there's recognition at the agenda-setting stage in Parliament that corruption is a public policy problem?
Yes, at Parliament level, there have been discussion as regards issues to do with corruption, but I feel more needs to be done in terms of really setting a level playing field for people within communities and not just at policy making stage or policy decision level. So even if we look at the community members that we assist, what is it that is being done within communities? Yes, there are awareness-raising sessions, but we need to improve these sessions and also improve our reach, increase our reach, so that people are aware of their rights, are aware of what the law provides, and then are able to contribute meaningfully through their members of parliament on issues that affect them within their particular communities. Just looking at parliament alone, but without really addressing other issues that appear on the ground, is not being comprehensive enough.
All right. Now, Valerie, I have been throwing this question around throughout the show. Now, are there any loopholes in Zimbabwe's corruption laws that need to be plugged to ensure better access to justice, especially for the vulnerable?
Oh, yes. I will look at it from the angle of a legal organization that provides support for people that are unable to get the services of lawyers in private practice. So looking at the current economic challenges that we have in Zimbabwe, these are some of the access to justice barriers. If you look at the Law Society tariff currently, in terms of people, in terms of lawyers, the rates that they charge, the ordinary person is unable to hire a lawyer to be able to represent them in any case that they face, not only the corruption-related matters, but any other matters altogether. So there are various barriers. Even when you look at the communities that we represent, how many lawyers are willing to go and be in these communities? So what we have done as an organization and also other organizations is to have a community structure that assists people within their communities so that information filters through. They do the reporting, they do the documentation, they also play the watchdog role, and then this then cascades upwards to the relevant sectors. So like Alois mentioned earlier on, in terms of our constitution, it's perfect. But the practicalities on the ground as regards issues to do with corruption, that's where the challenge arises. And I feel we need to go to the grassroots level, Candice, because this is where the ordinary man and woman is suffering. We can have something that looks perfect on paper, but when you then go to the lived realities of people within the communities, you then see problems altogether thereabout. And my opinion and that of my organization is that we also need to target communities, and not just urban communities, but also focusing on rural communities where we have the majority of Zimbabweans living, do they have access to information? We are live streaming right now, but how many people have access to such dialogues, such policy dialogues, such information? Do they even know the reporting channels? Do they even know how to take up their matters and ensure that the relevant culprits are brought to book?
All right. Valerie, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you for all the work that your organization is doing, especially, during this time, and making sure that people still have access to the legal help that they need. You have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Candice.
All right, Alois. So you heard Valerie and some of the issues that she raised. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Valerie raised a very important issues that you also agree with is Transparency International Zimbabwe. I always want to mention issues around access to information. Legal Resources Foundation and other NGOs like Swala, WEOSA, and they have been doing quite tremendous work at community level. But I think the missing link is the government. The government, like organizations like NPA, even ZAC itself is now starting to be visible, but they are not visible at grassroots level. And we feel that they need to be visible at grassroots level, and even to ensure that there's access to information. The other challenge that we have, like what Varel also lightly highlighted, I think to me, our legal system is very somehow bureaucratic and very cumbersome. It's very difficult for a vulnerable person to interrogate the system. Sometimes you are referred from one office to the other, cases are kept on referred and postponed. And the person is supposed to travel from the rural areas, maybe to an urban area, to attend court, but the case is postponed several times. And that also creates opportunities for corruption as long as cases keep on being postponed. So I think as Transparency International Zimbabwe, our thinking is that we need to make the justice system more simple and accessible to everyone. We also need to ensure that there's high turnaround of cases in terms of prosecution and convictions.
All right, perfect. Now, very quickly, because we're almost running out of time, Alois, sextortion has become a growing problem in Zimbabwe. Now, I know that TIZ has, of course, been advocating against sextortion. So perhaps you would be best placed to explain to us what is sextortion, first of all. Second of all, what are the drivers for this? And have you been able to lobby for any legal framework to help stop this practice?
Thank you so much. It's very true. Recently we conducted a study on gender impact analysis on corruption, and we discovered that sextortion is very, very prevalent in Zimbabwe. Sextortion is where sex is used as a currency, for example, to obtain some services. For example, a woman wants to, or a man, I don't know, but women mostly are the most vulnerable. For example, they want to get a birth certificate at the region. That's just an example. And maybe an officer says, no, for you to get the birth certificate, you have to sleep with me first. So that's how sextortion works. But what happens normally is in terms of the drivers in Zimbabwe. I will talk about within the justice system.
Yes.
We have also seen some instances where police officers themselves, for example, when women report cases of maintenance, domestic violence, and all those things, they may end up taking advantage of the situation of the women, possibly because they are a bit desperate, and they say, for your case to go ahead, for you to get the maintenance that you're trying to claim, possibly you need to fall in love first. So that's a type of corruption that is very prevalent. And as TIZ, what we are advocating for is the criminalization of sextortion. Right now, there are laws around sexual harassment, but there's no policy legal framework around sextortion on how people should report, where should they report, and all those issues. So what we are advocating for is to come up with a policy and legal framework to deal with sextortion.
All right, perfect. Now, Alois, we are sadly out of time, but I do want you to round up for us with just what your suggestions would be, what your alternatives would be when we look at policy, especially. What recommendations would, Transparency International Zimbabwe make in creating a corruption-free Zimbabwe?
Thank you so much. One of the main recommendations that we make as Transparency International Zimbabwe is to say, let's ensure that the cases, the people that are arrested are convicted and sentenced. We have very good laws on paper, but in terms of using the justice system to fight corruption, we feel we have a lot of work to still that needs to be done. So what we are saying, those people, the catch and leave phenomena should come to an end. Secondly, we are also advocating for government, maybe through ZAC, to ensure that they expedite the process of implementing building the national anti-corruption strategy so that we have a direction as a nation in terms of the fight against corruption. Then thirdly, for the vulnerable people to benefit from the justice system, we need to remove all the barriers and the processes that makes them impossible for them to access justice, and all the opportunities for corruption that are there for we are the vulnerable people not to access justice. So I think that's what we can then recommend the government to ensure that our systems are transparent, they are accessible, and people access justice whenever they want.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Alois.
You're welcome, thank you.
All right, so you have been watching Access to Justice. Now, thank you, of course, to Alois, who was from Transparency International Zimbabwe, who joined us in the studio, as well as Charity Matumbi from the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, Valerie Riuya from the Legal Resources Foundation, and Justin Uladi from the National Prosecuting Authority, who all joined us over the telephone. Now, Access to Justice, on ZTN. Our focus today was the accessibility to justice by vulnerable groups. This broadcast, remember, was brought to you by Zimpapers TV Network, ZTN, as well as our partners, Transparency International Zimbabwe. Now, please do stay up to date with what's going on around you using our social media platforms. On Facebook, that is Zimpapers TV Network, and on Twitter at ZTN News. My name is Candice. Thank you for joining us. Stay home and stay safe.